Do women really want to marry for money? According to a report from the London School of Economics, women are now more determined than ever to find a partner who will improve their financial prospects. Women's aspirations to marry up, if they can, to a man who is better educated and higher earning persists in most European countries, says the report's author, Catherine Hakim. Women continue to use marriage as an alternative or supplement to their employment careers, she concludes. By logical extension, it would appear men are keen to marry down, although nobody seems to query, much less gather statistics on their matrimonial motives. Arguably, there's nothing surprising in these findings, especially when you consider women with young children. A recent study by the National Centre for Social Research revealed that 1/3 of all mothers would prefer to give up their jobs if they could afford to, and 3/5 said they would want to work fewer hours. We asked journalist Jemima Lewis and novelist Jojo Moyes what they thought. Yes, says Jemima Lewis.
Women want rich husbands. Perhaps we don't often say it, perhaps we don't even like to admit it to ourselves, but women are practical creatures. A rich husband gives you options. One of the perks of being female is that you grow up knowing there's a slim chance that you might be able to marry a millionaire and retire before you hit middle age. If he is rich enough, your husband might pay for teams of nannies to look after your children while you busy yourself with Pilates. Working mothers like me tend to regard such wives with a disapproving eye. We call them trophy wives, as if to distinguish them from the real thing, but that is partly just to distract ourselves from the envy inside. Whether you fill your days with Pilates or child-rearing, not having to work is, well, less like hard work. Unfortunately, rich husbands, like handsome princes, are not easy to come by. Most of us, not moving in millionaire circles, are likely to fall in love with and marry a more normal bloke. In the meantime, you might have built up a career that you are proud of and reluctant to give up. If you then have a baby, you are doomed to an inner life of conflict and guilt as you try to find a way to bring up your child without going bankrupt or insane. Like a winning lottery ticket, a rich husband would solve your problems at a stroke, allowing you to calibrate your work-life balance to suit yourself rather than your mortgage provider.
No, says Jojo Moyes.
Today's young women, having observed their mothers juggling a full-time job and all the domestic responsibility, having the odd nervous breakdown and still having to look glamorous, have now decided they prefer to be kept by a wealthy husband. Who can blame them? There are times, usually when sick children and deadlines collide, that I think the same thing. But marry rich, and you may marry a man who views you as a commodity. You may spend much of your time alone. A high-flying career often means an absent husband and father. You can marry for money, but it's not a marriage. It's a deal. And I suspect only the toughest of women can see that with the clarity it requires. The divorce courts are littered with high earners, as well as the shattered dreams of traded-in middle-aged wives who have been replaced by a younger, more glamorous model. My children have long played a game called Who's Got the Sourest Face in Waitrose. It's always the wives in the really expensive cars. My husband and I have taken turns as the highest earner. Earning my own money means I don't have to justify my shoe habit, and he doesn't shoulder the mortgage alone. And having a career brings me more contentment than having a designer handbag. So I wouldn't be delighted if my daughter ended up with a dropout. But I'd feel worse if she thought the most important thing about a man was his bank balance.
3.15.
Where did the idea of microfinance come from?
The idea behind microfinance again goes back to the mid-70s. There had been by that time, several decades of what we call the Western world giving massive amounts of aid to the developing world, and a realization that a lot of it was not working. There were still many people who were left poor. So, Muhammad Yunus is credited as being the father of microfinance. He's an economist living in Bangladesh, a very poor country. And he looked around and he said, what is it that the poor lack? What is it that they need? And the answer is obvious: they need money. And all of us, in order to get started, have had access to credit. So the poor can't get access to credit. They can't go to relatives to borrow because generally the relatives are as poor as they themselves are. And they certainly cannot go into a bank and borrow because they have no collateral.
How did Dr. Yunus solve these problems?
There are really three innovations that he came up with that are brilliant in hindsight. One was, okay, the poor have no collateral, but let's figure out a way to create collateral, which means collateral is basically if you're not going to pay back the loan, that somebody's held responsible. So he came up with a lending methodology where there was a group of peers that were given the loan, and they would be lending to each other, and the group held each member accountable for paying back. The second innovation that he came up with is that it is very difficult for the poor to gather a lump sum to pay back a loan. But if you can break up that payment into very small, regular payments that are coming out of your daily income, then it's feasible to pay back the loan. So what microcredit did was to break up the loan payment into these very sort of regular small payments. And the third was really an incentive system that the poor were not encouraged to borrow a large amount. They only borrowed what they could use in their business and then pay back. And if they paid back successfully, then they were eligible for a larger loan.
3.16.
Do you have any examples of individual success stories?
Oh, I love talking about individual success stories because this is what sort of gets us up in the morning and gets us to come to work and stay late and do this work. Since I've been at Women's World Banking, I've been to the Dominican Republic, Jordan, and India. So I'm happy to give you a story from each of the three countries. The DR is a more established economy, if you will, and so the woman I met had already had successive loans that she had taken from our partner in the DR. And what she did was to start out, she was basically selling food from her kitchen, making excess food and selling it to the factory workers. Took out a loan, sort of increased that business, and then set up a little cantina out of her living room so that along with food, she was selling cigarettes, beer, candy, etc. That business did well, took out another loan, and built a room on top of her house and started to rent it out. And so over 7 years, what she's been able to do is to completely build a new home for herself and rent out the old one. And this is going to ensure income in her old age, because at some point she's going to be too old to work in the kitchen and to be standing on her feet behind the cantina counter. And she's looking at these rental rooms that she has been able to put on as her old age security.
3.17.
In Jordan, I'll tell you about a young woman that we met. Sort of the cultural norm in Jordan is that a fairly old husband can marry again and marry a fairly young woman. So the one that we met, her husband was now too old and sick. So while he took care of having a roof over her head, she had absolutely no means of earning more money for herself or her kids. And at her socioeconomic level, it's not considered proper for a woman to go out and work. So the only thing that she was able to do was she had taken a loan to buy cosmetics and was selling them from her living room to her neighbors. And this was considered to be an okay business for her because primarily she was dealing with other women. But it gave her that sort of extra money to use for herself.
3.22.
1,
20.
2,
Internet.
3,
Party.
4,
Clever.
5,
Turn.
6,
Honest.
7,
Coffee.
8,
Awesome.
9,
New.
10,
Root.
11,
Vase.
12,
Leisure.
13,
Inquiry.
14,
Mustache.
15.
Address.
3.18.
And then in India, where I was recently in the city of Hyderabad, and Hyderabad is this up-and-coming city, it's gleaming. Indians themselves are thinking of it as the next cyber city. But across town, they have slums where even now, both men and women have not gone to school, they're not educated, and their only recourse is to work in the informal economy. So the family that we met, the husband was a vegetable seller, so he took his cart and went out into the more affluent neighborhoods. The son had dropped out of school to join his father to push a similar cart, and the mother had taken a loan to embroider saris. And she did this at home, sort of in her spare time. And what she really wanted to do was to amass enough income so that she could cut out the middleman, because she basically got half of what that sari was worth because she was handing it over to a middleman. So that if she could buy the materials herself, embroider it herself, and sell it herself to the store, she could in effect double her income without doubling her labor.
3.19.
And the answer is obvious: they need money. And all of us, in order to get started, have had access to credit. So the poor can't get access to credit. They can't go to relatives to borrow because generally the relatives are as poor as they themselves are.
3.20.
And the answer is obvious: they need money. And all of us, in order to get started, have had access to credit. So, the poor can't get access to credit. They can't go to relatives to borrow because generally the relatives are as poor as they themselves are.
3.21.
1,
20, 20.
2,
Internet, internet.
3,
Party, party.
4,
Clever, clever.
5,
Turn, turn.
6,
Honest, honest.
7,
Coffee, coffee.
8,
Awesome, awesome.
9,
New, new.
10,
Route, route.
11,
Vase, vase.
12,
leisure, leisure,
13,
inquiry, inquiry,
14,
moustache, mustache,
15,
address, address,